Good afternoon. For older people, particularly those with health conditions, poverty can be a life or death issue. Yet in a city like Norwich, every year, hundreds of thousands in benefits goes unclaimed. Welcome to the latest in a series of later life conversations hosted by AGK Norwich. I'm Pete Kelly, a retired journalist volunteering with the charity. And with us today to discuss poverty in later life are Hannah Worsley, Project Manager at Norwich Foodbank, Emily Balsdon, the Director of Norfolk Community Advice Network, an alliance of charities which offers social welfare and legal advice, and AGK Norwich's Information Advice and Welfare Manager, Jo Willingham, whose team advise older people on their entitlements on debt, welfare, and a range of other issues. So Jo, I'm wondering perhaps we could start by asking you, what exactly is poverty? How should we define it?
Well, that's a good question to start with. And in fact, there are quite a few different ways of defining it. So put at its most simplest, I guess you're talking about somebody who just doesn't have enough income or resources to meet their basic needs. So I'm talking about, not enough money to buy food, not enough money to heat their home. So a very simple definition, but there are some more official terms as well, as you can imagine. So one of those is that you would be seen to be in poverty if you have an income of below 60% of the current typical household income. That's taking into account others, in the household. So that's probably one that you might hear or read as a definition in government records and reports and things like that. And it's quite easy, I suppose, for us to define someone as living in poverty, thinking about their income, but we should also think about material income, by which I mean somebody who hasn't got enough savings behind them. So if they had an emergency, they're not going to be able to replace their fridge, freezer, because they just don't have the resources. And so, you're facing another problem there if you're not able to support yourself in those circumstances. Department of Work and Pensions, DWP, have a measure of material income. There's apparently some very good research that shows that there's about 15 basic items that denote a good indicator of a quality of life. If you're lacking 3 or 4 of those, then you could be seen to be in poverty. And those are the things like having a damp-free home, being able to pay your bills regularly, and even being able to see friends and family on a regular basis, being able to afford to do that. And then United Nations have some very good terms that they use. One is absolute poverty, and the other is regular or relative poverty. Relative poverty being someone who has enough income just about to make ends meet, but nothing extra. And absolute poverty, where somebody just doesn't have enough even for their basic needs. So yes, started on a complicated question. There were lots of different answers, but yeah. You see what I'm getting at there.
Very helpful, thank you. And Hannah, how do you see that at the food bank? How would you sort of characterize poverty?
I think I would say very similar. I'm very glad Jo got that question first, because that was a really helpful way to sort of frame it. Yeah. Something that we've been throwing around within the Trussell Trust, so we're our own independent food bank, but we come under the Trussell Trust's model, is they often talk about destitution. And so they did a report quite recently into the state of hunger, and saying it's not just, as we talk about the food bank, it's not just about food. And as Jo mentioned, there's bills and things like that, things that need to be replaced to give a quality of life. Even if it's a poor quality, it still is quite limiting. And so within that report that we're saying, lots of families that were coming to use the food bank only had £50 per week after paying just rent or a mortgage. So that's all bills, food, and anything else that we might consider a luxury, but even things like clothes and school uniforms. So I think, poverty, is, as Jo mentioned, is a really wide term, but it can be often deemed of as money or food, and actually it's often quite a lot bigger than that.
Yeah. How do you see this, Emily? Would you?
Yeah, in a similar vein, really, and I'd add to that as well. I think poverty is when, you know, when someone's prevented from being able to participate in society and not able to kind of exercise their rights really as a citizen. So it could be something like not being able to afford a digital device or the internet these days, because so many of the vital services people need are through that route. So I think like the others have said, it isn't just about, you know, whether you can afford food, but even things like food, I think it becomes a bit more complicated as well, because it could be about, you know, what kind of food are you able to afford, and are you able to afford food that's, you know, sustaining for you and your family as well.
Yeah, and so you're saying it's about functioning in society as well as just feeding yourself. So I mean, you're with the sort of Community Advice Network. I mean, how much of your work is dealing with older people specifically, would you say? Is that a big part?
I mean, I think it is a big part of it, yeah. Obviously, there's quite a large proportion of Norfolk's population are older people as well, but our network includes Age UK Norwich and Age UK Norfolk, and we all work together in collaboration to make sure that everybody gets kind of all the advice and support they need. And I did ask around some of our other key partners in the advice network, and so places like Shelter, who obviously are housing specialists, last year about a quarter of the people that they supported were older people, and there was a similar figure, around a quarter as well, for somewhere like Norfolk Community Law Service, who provide free legal advice in a range of different legal issues. So I think those kind of statistics show that it isn't a rarity that older people are needing advice and support in a range of different issues in Norwich and Norfolk as well. And then we have kind of a wider network as well, which we work with lots of different public sector partners and other charities in Norfolk, and we see a lot of older people needing support from lots of different places and facing a range of kind of different issues that all impact on each other, like poverty and loneliness and mental health problems. And it could be it could have been happening over a long time and things are just getting worse, or it could be sparked by something like the death of a partner, for example, that then starts a spiral and causes lots of problems. So yeah, we see it a lot at NCAN.
I see, Hannah, I see you're nodding there. I mean, I was wondering, what proportion of the people coming to you are older people? Are they?
Well, interestingly, it's how we define older, because in our stats we capture 25 to 64-year-olds as one category, and I know with Age UK, well, I think with Age UK, it's anyone over the age of 50. So anyone over 50, if they're counted as older, they're in our sort of general category. So anyone over the age of 64, in our terms, we're only seeing about 2% a month, which is really tiny considering our county, as Emily's saying, it's an older county. A lot of people would say that. So we know, I think we'll probably come on to it, that there's a lot of people out there who maybe don't know about us or don't know how to access us. But what I was nodding about was sort of Emily saying why people are thrown into poverty sometimes. It might be that they're just about managing and one little thing happens, but it may be, as you said, there's sort of a catalyst, a partner dying. We often see that either the other partner's left has no idea about their finances whatsoever, or their two incomes were what's needed to run that household, and suddenly that reduction, as we've seen with people getting furloughed, haven't we, in this past year, one person's income in the household has a massive impact on everybody else, and it's not necessarily a quick fix. So yeah, not again a straightforward answer, I'm afraid.
No, but it's very useful. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, so I mean, Joe, I mean, we're sort of starting to talk a bit about what are the reasons people get into poverty. What is your experience?
I was just going to say also, just on the back of what Emily and Hannah were saying, that actually 55% of the issues that we dealt with last year were, and that's obviously with older people, 50 plus, you're quite right, Hannah, but that was all related to income maximisation and benefit entitlements, money issues, food bank vouchers, debt. So, it is a very large proportion of our work, supporting people on limited funds. And because we work with people 50 plus, We've got people who are still at work, working age, and on low income and not earning enough. And the benefit system isn't necessarily supportive enough of those people that are still in working age. And then at the other end of the scale, we obviously work with people on a very fixed retirement income. And, you know, so it's difficult then to improve that. So that's generally linked to, you know, going on to the second part of your question there, it's generally linked to a lifetime of either, you know, in or out of work, not saving sufficiently in terms of pensions. And I think with older people, as you've mentioned, there's bereavement, but we also see a lot of people who have sudden onset of illness. That can be a big issue to a family, especially if they're the breadwinner. And there's been during COVID an exacerbation of that with redundancies and furlough, and actually people having to stay at home longer and pay to heat their homes when actually they would have been out at work during the day. So, you know, increased expenses at a time when incomes are lower, maybe. So I think in terms of older people, also their priorities change. So as you get older, as you are maybe staying at home longer, you may have a disability, your priorities are going to change. You're probably going to want the heating on longer at home because of your health issues. You're not going out and about so much. It's costly maybe to insulate the home and make sure that it's a safe place to live in during cold weather. So, you know, when you're younger, your priorities are a bit different. So I think maybe expenses increase in some ways as you get older.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Emily, what would you say from your experience? What are the reasons people are getting into poverty? Is it?
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, yeah. Where do you start and where do you stop? Really, I mean, I think I think one massive thing is maybe just a lack of awareness of what people are entitled to. So I know Joe mentioned around benefits and income maximisation. I just think there are, you know, thousands of older people in Norwich who aren't actually claiming all of the benefits that they're entitled to, and attendance allowance that specifically for older people is one of the ones that is the least well known of. So I think that there may be actually help and support available for people, or entitlements that they just haven't been given that information in a way that they're able to use. So I think that's one thing. I suppose as well, there may be a stigma around like asking for help, or even, you know, seeing whether you are entitled to any benefits. So a kind of a cultural issue there, personal confidence, and maybe that's lacking. And then I think as well, you know, services and the kind of wider ecosystem of support that's out there in community, there's been a lack of investment in that over many years, and then services that prevent people from living in poverty is they're not sort of sustained in a way that's needed.
Just building on what Emily has said there, Age UK National have done some research, and there's nearly 1 million pensioner households who are entitled to pension credit, and they're not claiming it. So that's the other benefit on top of attendance allowance, pension credit top up. And it never ceases to amaze me how many of our clients are not aware of what they may be entitled to. And I think Emily's right there. There's a stigma, maybe even all the way back to memories of the workhouse. You know, I know that's years, you know, decades away, but that seems to still come through. But I think also people are put off by the claiming process. Very complicated, or they appear to be very complicated forms. And they also, I think a lot of our clients tell us, well, you know, I'm not as bad as my friend down the road, so you know, really I'm not entitled to it. And so, you know, there's a lot of lack of awareness of what's potentially available to people to bolster up their incomes.
And we see very similar, saying I'm not as bad as someone else and I'm really sorry to ask. So it's not about comparing someone else, it's you're entitled to this, whatever their situation is actually. And actually if you can then encourage them to claim or do whatever, then you could be a good example to them, couldn't you?
Yeah.
And we often, when we go to talks, particularly to older groups, so like women's unions or mothers' unions, women's institutes, where they're mainly older people, we do hear a lot of, well, we were all right when we were younger, so why is there a need for food banks and that sort of service now? So I think there's definitely an element of pride of saying, well, other people could cope, and either they're worse off than me, or my parents were fine and we were in a lot worse position. And I think that's really difficult to say, but the times are so different now in terms of expenses and inflation, but also even just thinking about knowing your neighbourhood, knowing your community and saying, could someone help me out? So often these days, nobody has a clue who's next door. And so you wouldn't be aware that Mrs. So-and-so was struggling. And I think that's a huge thing that we hear of, that people have got in a really bad position before they come and ask for help.
So you think perhaps they're waiting too long? I mean,
we do hear that sometimes. There's a lady that sticks in my mind who rang saying she had a tin of soup and she thinks it would last her 2 or 3 days. So could we help her in 2 or 3 days? We're saying, well, we can help you now. You know, that's not okay to live like that. But she thought, well, I've got something, therefore I'm not at the end of my, you know, rope or whatever the expression is. And I think that's where we see people, other people, you might go to the cupboards, they've got absolutely nothing. Well, I might think, oh, I need to go shopping tomorrow. I've still got a full cupboard and a full freezer, but I just need to top up. But people who are living in poverty, and particularly who are living hand to mouth, they're going to get right to the end of what they have before they ask for help. And again, there's the pride element of going, I might be okay, things might turn around, something else might come along, and then it doesn't. And so we often get that panicked phone call on a Friday night going, I've got nothing for the weekend. And part of me sort of thinks, how did you not know that yesterday? You know, but it is always thinking, sometimes it's a bit of denial, I think. People, it's such a difficult situation to be in that I don't want to admit. So ringing the food bank is a last resort, but also I can't believe things have got that bad that I need to ring the food bank. And I think we often get that sort of sentiment when we're having those conversations.
I think it's really important for people, if they've got a change of circumstances in any way. We've talked about bereavement, we've talked about redundancy, you know, sudden onset of illness. All of those changes and circumstances would indicate a need for a benefit check, just to get in touch and to find out what someone might be entitled to, not make any assumptions, you know, not assume you're not entitled, give it a go, and have a benefit check, and don't leave it too late. You know, the sooner the better. It does take a bit of time with benefits to process, so it's not necessarily an instant thing. And so that's where I think places like the food bank really come into their own, because they can help bridge a bit of a gap whilst somebody is you know, trying to get back on track. So it's a really valuable service to help people have a step up and you know, manage during that difficult interim period.
I think that's why it's so important that different agencies know about each other and work together in partnership, and not thinking, oh, you're a charity and I'm health, so we've got nothing to do with each other, because we want professionals in all those areas when people who have those experiences to proactively, you know, make sure that that person is kind of inquiring about benefits, or that they're aware of it, because it probably isn't one of our organisations that sees them right at that moment of bereavement or ill health. It's the GP or something like that. So I think that's why it's really important to spread the word amongst different sort of agencies and services, so that they can make people aware of that too.
We get quite a few referrals from the British Red Cross, who are based in the hospital. So people who've been admitted either suddenly or long term, and then they're going to go home, and they do the home visit and say they've got nothing. They really shouldn't be able to go home without some kind of support. So the physical support is in place, but actually there's going to be no food or no one to cook the food. And so we've often done parcels on a Friday afternoon or Saturday morning for people who've been released, and there's no way they can wait until Monday. But that's exactly what you're saying, joining up those services, saying, you can do your bit, but it's not just about their health, it's about all those knock-on effects of what that then means going home. So I think those examples are really positive, and yeah, good to share those.
And in terms of people that are sort of knowing what's available, I know sort of, Hannah, you've got a campaign sort of to try and stress that the food bank is not just about food, actually. I mean, I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, there's loads of sort of hashtags going around, sort of not just a food bank or more than a food bank, because I think years ago when we first started, and of course the name gives it away, isn't it, that it is food. That is our main thing, that if people are in need, food is going to be the thing they need. But we also do give toiletries and pet food. And when we have those conversations with people, they say, oh yes, that would be amazing, because my dog or my cat, or, you know, sanitary products, all those sorts of things are really essential as well. And unless we offer them, people don't know that we have them. But also we have a scheme with the gas and electric for people who, again, have got the food and got the means to cook, in terms of they've got the equipment, but don't necessarily have the funds. We were talking earlier about heating your house as well as cooking your food and whatever else. And again, as Joe was saying, in COVID, people have been home a lot more, and so that has really raised those bills. So we can help people with a one-off payment towards gas or electric. But again, why would people know that? We're the food bank, so why would people ask those sorts of questions? So it's good to make sure people are aware, the agencies that we work with, that they know we can do. And if we can't, there's lots of other charities we can link in with. So as well as working with each other to get referrals, so we'll get the referral for the food, but we might make a referral back for extra additional support like the benefits checks. But we work with a charity called Acts 435 who help fund various items. So we've helped people get school uniforms and uniform for work and a mobile phone for you know, accessing services and communicating with friends and family. And so there's so many different places out there. We can't expect those that we serve to know everything. So that's sort of part of our job, to try and connect those things up without overloading someone. If they ring us, we go, oh, here's 100 different places you can go to. Well, that's far too difficult. So it's trying to pinpoint what exactly is the need now and what can we do about it.
And I know, Joe, I mean, you've sort of, there's a big issue for you, I think, possibly, that people just coming too late and not waiting till they've got into an emergency. And
yes,
I think we're all saying that it's easier to help people if you've got some more notice.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly better for the person involved as well, obviously, not to have gotten to in a really stressful situation, but I would say it's never too late, you know, so I wouldn't want people not to come to us just because, you know, they're in the middle of a crisis. And sometimes it's helpful, isn't it, for someone to have a fresh pair of eyes looking at the situation and out of the circumstances, have a different perspective on things. I think when you're in a crisis, you don't necessarily think very clearly, do you? So you're probably panicking and not really focusing very well. So, but yes, ideally, we would love people to come to us, you know, if they have a change on the horizon, even if they're reaching retirement soon, come and see us. We can do a benefit check before they've left work. And, you know, there may be other things that they might like to talk about. For instance, volunteering opportunities even, you know, and you know, how are you going to spend your days once you have left work? So, you know, advice and information can be welfare advice related, but it can also be quite holistic and looking at the whole situation, seeing if there are any other issues. Could be that someone's in very bad housing, and, you know, should we be looking at that to see whether a landlord should be carrying out certain repairs, or might be that somebody wishes to downsize as part of their minimising their costs, because, you know, whilst we're maximising someone's income, we're looking at minimising their costs as well, and hopefully you meet somewhere in the middle and it balances, a household budget will balance better. So, you know, it's a holistic approach, but yes, sooner is better, but, you know, in crisis, do please also come to us, because, you know, we will be there to support you.
Yeah.
I just briefly add to that as well. I think it's difficult for people, it's difficult for us all to sometimes actually articulate what we need or articulate the problem, or we don't really know where to start. So I would just also say that that's part of what, you know, Age UK and other advice charities do as well. You don't have to have it all like clearly in your head exactly what you need and the different stages you need to go through, and even really be able to like express yourself well, because that is really difficult when you're in a crisis or you're struggling with ill health. So just to sort of encourage people to get in contact anyway, and it's about just making that step of asking asking, you know, I need some help or advice, isn't it? And then working with people to unpick what you need.
I sometimes find myself saying to people who come to the charity that if they're confused about what they want, that people like you guys deal with this stuff all the time. You're going to have a better idea of what help they need than possibly the person themselves. That seems to be what you're sort of saying there, Emily. That you guys have possibly you've got a kind of map of what's available. And
it's also about prioritising, helping the client to prioritise what needs to be done first, and then working through an action plan almost with them, always in agreement with the client. I think that's an important issue. We don't, as advisors, just impose what we think is the best. We will, you know, that's in discussion with the client to find the best solution for them. But you know, usually there is a priority to the things that need to be done, and topmost really is to get money for that client, you know, as soon as possible, and food, obviously.
Do you think, Joe, sometimes people just don't think there's a way out of it? I mean,
I'm sure that's the case. I think also that people don't realise how much we all do individually as organisations. So, you know, certainly I've had that quite frequently if I've gone to give talks, as you're saying, Hannah, and people will say afterwards, well, I didn't realise that Age UK did all of those things. So it's quite important to just get somebody to step over the threshold, even if it's virtually at the moment, just dip a toe in. And as soon as we've met somebody, you know, we will be, you know, chatting to them about their situation, looking at it holistically, as I said, and with them, helping them to find the best way forward for whatever their situation is. And I think, Emily, that's a good point where you say that people don't have to know even how to tell you the story, because sometimes people will come to us and, you know, you'd imagine that they would say, you know, well, this first happened to me and then this happened, and then well, actually they tend to start in the middle of the story sometimes, and we have to almost be detectives to kind of pull together what really is happening, and then talk that through with the client to make sure our understanding is correct. And as you say, Pete, we are very used to that. That's our bread and butter, day in, day out stuff that we are doing. And nothing would be shocking for us. Nothing would be, you know, we would never feel somebody has been silly or stupid to get into that situation. We do understand how these things come about, and we'll just look at it practically and help the person go forward step by step and at their own pace.
You must find, Hannah, you must be finding people coming to you who are quite stressed, and therefore, for that reason, if for no other, find it difficult to explain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we get a lot of that. So we get people ringing up as a self-referral, so not having a clue where to go and just literally Googling Foodbank, and because it's on the news and people sort of are quite familiar with that term now. So just finding us that way. And then when we say, you know, we can do all these extra bits for you, but also we can now refer you through NCAN to whoever is the most appropriate agency. Sometimes people say, I'm not ready for that yet. So that's fine. You know, we're here for you, but we do need to get you the support and advice so that you don't need to come back. That's what our aim is. But quite often people say, oh, yes, please, I've been ringing so-and-so for ages and I've not heard back, or haven't got any phone credit to be on the phone for that long. Lots of places, or they might close at 2 and they're ringing at 3 o'clock or whatever it might be. So NCAN has been really useful for us, particularly over this last year when everything has been done by email and by phone. So, well, actually, we can make that referral for you. You don't need to worry. And we have heard of people being called back that same day because they've had capacity to do so. And that's excellent, because there's no sort of onus on that person. If they're ringing the food bank, they're probably in some kind of crisis. So to then have to make a phone call or go somewhere is just something else to add to that already really long list. So if we can take that one bit off them and they've just got to answer the phone and go through a few questions and get a bit further. I think, as you said, Joe, you know, you're unpicking the story, but even just starting on that process, think, oh goodness, someone else is helping me along with it. I've got another pair of ears to listen to, and that can be a really big help. But it is a massive step. We do understand it's really difficult to ask for help that very first time, so we try our best to be really welcoming and helpful, because that's the first call someone's made. We don't want to be sort of scaring them off that process or inundating them with information.
Absolutely, yeah. I suppose I was interested, you made that point. It was a new thought to me, in a sense, that I mean, we've talked about forms being a bit difficult to fill in sometimes for people, but I mean, sometimes just to make a phone call that's quite daunting for a lot of people who are not used to doing that.
Yeah, people don't know what they're going to be asked. They don't know who's going to pick up the phone. They don't know if they're going to get a yes at the end of all those questions. And sometimes we can say, would you like us to refer you to whoever? And they'll say yes. And then when they get the phone call from the NCAN advisors, whoever they might be, they might say, oh, no, I didn't want any help. They're just saying yes in order to sort of appease and make that process as simple as possible. So we've changed the order of our questions. So we get all the information we need for Food Bank. And then right at the end, we say, if you'd like us to, we can make a referral, but there's no obligation. And so now we're getting people say, oh, well, I'll think about it, or I know where you are, or yes, actually, yeah, that would be really helpful because we can talk about it. Whereas if it's done at the beginning, I think people feel it's part of a contract, so they'll only get the food if they say yes to everything else. So we've got to ask lots of different questions to make sure we can get the food to the right people, and so that we know that we're getting the right dietary requirements, even, and all those sort of extra bits of information, but try to limit it as much as we can, because we know it can be stressful for people on the phone.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, look, we're trying to keep this reasonably sort of tight in terms of people listening to it. So I guess we're coming towards the end of our period. I wonder if I could just perhaps ask you if each of you, if you had one sort of brief message for people. You've told us a lot already, but what one tip would you give to people who are experiencing these kind of problems? Maybe start with Jo and go around.
Well, I think probably I'm anticipating that we may say the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's just that point of please come to us for advice. If you're in difficulties, don't wait. Do get in touch. Doesn't matter really which organisation you get in touch with, because we all hold a no wrong door way of working. So, we will know who's best for you to work with. So just make that first step, and you'd be surprised, I think, that, many people might well be entitled to something such as housing benefit. And we've mentioned pension credit and attendance allowance. All of those benefits may very well be appropriate for you.
Thank you. Emily, how about yourself?
Ditto.
Ditto. Yeah.
I think everything Jo said, but I think there's no shame in asking for help, and you don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to wait until you feel overwhelmed, or even if you think, I can probably last a bit longer. Like there's no reason to wait until then. You are entitled to that support, and your situation, sadly probably isn't actually that unique. Like Jo said, it's the bread and butter of what the organisation and the advisors do, so don't feel like you failed in any way.
Hannah?
Yeah, so echo the others.
And
just to say that as Emily said, there's no sort of typical situation. So you don't have to be on benefits. You don't have to be a council tenant. There's so many different things. People go, oh, well, I'm not this and I'm not that and I'm not the other. Therefore, so no, we at the Food Bank are here for anybody who's in need. So Age UK might have an age category, but actually it's younger than you might think. So if you say sort of over 50, you think, oh goodness, I didn't know I was an older person. So I think it is just if you're in need, as Jo said, no wrong door policy. If we're not the right place that we can help you with, I doubt any of us would put the phone down. We'd say, well, we'll find somewhere that can help you and make that referral on. So whoever you phone, someone will be friendly towards you and find the right place if they're not it.
I think that's a very encouraging message to sort of end on. Much appreciated. So, thank you to Hannah Worsley from Norwich Foodbank, Emily Balsdon from the Norfolk Community Advice Network, and Jo Willingham from Age UK Norwich. All the contact details of those organisations will be appearing on your screen shortly. So thank you for listening.